The Adélie penguin is just, he's the New York taxi driver. He's just so characterful, so aggressive, constantly chatting, constantly in your face. And then they're just such characterful penguins. And they just do things all the time. And they're very, very funny. I mean, you just have to put a camera on an Adélie penguin and you laugh. And so I knew from the very beginning that these were going to be a fantastic star for Disneynature and a great family character, actually, because Disneynature movies are family movies. One of the things that surprises people about Disneynature is that we actually write classic 40, 50-page scripts, movie scripts, and we base that on our experience. Both Jeff Wilson, my co-director, and I have worked with Adélie penguins for TV series many, many times, so we understand the behaviors, we understand the natural story of the penguins, and we base our script on that, and we decide who's going to be our key character. And one of the exciting things for us about this movie is that it was a male. You know, Steve is a guy, obviously, and that's been pretty rare in Disneynature so far. Usually we've followed mothers and they're young. But we decided for the first time we needed a male star. And that was very refreshing and exciting for us as filmmakers. Our movie is about the first time that Steve, a 5-year-old penguin, he hasn't had a chance to breed before, comes back, tries to find a mate, tries to bring up his 2 chicks. And it's a challenge for him. There are actually very, very few animals that can survive that far south in Antarctica, and the penguins dominate. But all the other animals that the predators are there, almost their main source of food are actually the penguins. There's an amazing predatory bird in Antarctica called a skua. It's sort of a vulture-like predator that loves to steal the eggs. That's one problem. But also, when the little chicks are small, the penguin chicks, they'll come and try and steal the chicks. And Steve and Adélie have to work very hard, both to make sure the skuas don't steal their eggs. And later in the movie, when they're at sea, they come back and just at the right moment save their chicks from a skua. If that wasn't bad enough, they then have to go out to sea to find their food. And you have to realize that sometimes in a single feeding trip, they'll go 100 miles out to sea. That's a big journey. And waiting for them out there are killer whales, orca. And there is a certain type of killer whale in Antarctica that specializes in eating penguins. And that's pretty extraordinary. And the last and probably the most fearsome predator in Antarctica is this amazing seal called the leopard seal. It's got extraordinary teeth, it's a very big seal, and it's an ambush predator. And it hides under the ice, the broken ice that you get at the end of the season, and tries to grab the chicks. And getting one of the greatest challenges that Steve and Adélie had at the end of the movie was to try and get their chicks to swim for the first time. I think one of the special things that people are going to see in this movie is Antarctica itself. You know, it's one of the most beautiful places on our planet. It's also one of the most remote places. Very few people go there. And the joy of Disneynature is we can take you there. You know, you can get there and get immersed in the joy of that extraordinary place, like on the big screen, like, you know, it's a unique experience.
It tells the story of a penguin's kind of annual life cycle through the specific narrative of one penguin who is named Steve. And so we follow Steve through his sort of yearly process and his family, his chicks and his nest and his mate and all the hardships that he goes through. And it's really, it's very beautiful and also educational in the sense that, oh, we're learning what penguins do every year, but it's also quite poignant because you're kind of getting to know this specific penguin. So it's really, really special. Disney is a really special voice in storytelling because so many Disney movies are filled with real poignancy and real emotion, but also are extremely funny and relatable. And this movie is no different. It's a true life adventure of a real penguin. It's real footage of penguins in Antarctica, but it's all told in a way that somehow tugs at your heartstrings a little bit and also has quite a few chuckles. the star of the film is Steve, and very soon in the movie we meet his mate Adélie, and we see how they build a nest together and raise chicks together, and it becomes very poignant because what I think most people don't realize about penguins, because they're so adorable, is that they're also really tough and that their lives are very difficult. Antarctica is a inhospitable place, and there are lots of predators in the ocean. The weather, the climate is tough, and they're tenacious. So they're in a lot of danger at times, but they fight through it, and they have this incredible spirit, and it's very powerful. Yeah, so I'm a new-ish dad, and it really gave me some insight into Steve's trial and error parenting, which I think that's just how you have to approach it. You do your best, and it's mostly right, but sometimes you're wrong, and you learn, and you just keep going, and in that way, Steve is he just has such this like incredible spirit. He never gives up. He just keeps trying to keep plugging away, and he faces some very serious challenges in this movie. There's something really cool about the way Disneynature releases these movies. This movie is tied in with Wildlife Conservation Network, as well as the Global Penguin Society. So ticket sales from the first week that it opens contribute to those entities, and it's just really cool.
We first meet our main character, Steve, as he's returning back across the ice after 6 months out in the polar darkness. And Steve is although he doesn't know it yet, is about to become a first-time father. You know, he's got an instinct within him that tells him that something special is going to happen this year, and he's not quite sure what it is. And it just so turns out that Steve's a kind of a doofus. You know, he just doesn't really, you know, he's one of those guys that's constantly falling over, who always gets things wrong the first time and sort of bumbles through life. And so his story really becomes that sort of coming of age, kind of growing up of adulthood that he has to kind of quickly get right. Although being Steve, he always doesn't get it right. And along that journey, he meets this fantastic female Adélie penguin named Adélie. And Adélie is really the counter to Steve. You know, Adélie is very measured, very kind of world-wise, very experienced. And so she kind of is that counterbalance to Steve's doofusness, really. And together they take on this huge challenge of trying to raise this family in one of the world's hardest places to raise a family. There are these crazy guys who are underwater camera people who we use, who are incredibly brave, but also incredibly professional, who take equipment, again, not designed for polar environments, and adapt it such that they can spend, you know, up to an hour underneath the ice. And they have a very rigorous safety procedure, but still, you know, these guys are diving under a shifting platform in minus, you know, 20 conditions with water at, you know, kind of +2 or +1. You know, it's a very extreme environment to not only to dive in, but then once they're in there, they also have to film, you know, and they have to interact with their animals. They have to film natural behavior. All of those things are incredibly complicated. And so that's why we sort of draw from some of the best on the world. You know, the guys who go down to these parts of the world for us are literally the best film diving teams that you could choose to kind of employ, and they make it worth it. We always wanted it to be a funny film, but in the hands of someone like Ed, it's an even funnier film. And, you know, and he brought things to the table that, you know, are simply we couldn't have imagined as being, you know, part of the humor palette that is there. And it's just simple things. It's simple things about understanding how to be Steve and inhabit space and think like Steve, and then bring out a line that none of us have written, and just just kind of know that that's exactly what Steve would have said in that moment in time. And that's a super special skill that, you know, I mean, I'm completely staggered about how good he has made the film with his input. What Steve really illustrates very well is that there is no perfect way to be a parent. You know, we're all making mistakes. We're all doing it constantly. And even those who make big mistakes, like Steve, somehow manage to get through it. And we've all been there as parents, and we've all made mistakes. And I think Steve shows us that it's possible, even if you're bringing up your family under the most dire conditions you could possibly imagine, to muddle your way through. And I think we all have it in us, just through the effort and the almost innate desire to bring up a family perfectly, that we'll always get there in the end. And I think Steve helps us with that in some ways. Disneynature has that role of reminding people that there are places out there in the world that are special, that are beautiful, that there are things going on there that we can connect to as human beings that are not that unsimilar to our own lives. You know, the natural world isn't something else. It's actually on a continuum with us. We are part of it. And I think that's our role, really, is to kind of make people love it, make people understand it, make people connect to it emotionally, and hopefully learn something important about it and go away with a thirst for knowledge to find out more.
It's the story of a young penguin father who kind of learns how to become a dad. And it's interesting because it really parallels what I think human dads go through as well. You know, it's about learning, it's about understanding, and then it's becoming the best dad you can be. The thing that I love most about working on Disneynature is the fact that it is an introduction in many ways to a lot of people about animal life. And animal life is incredibly similar to our lives. I mean, the fact of the matter is we're animals. So you can see how family and good parenting is so important. But in this particular case, it's survival. It's all about survival. And I think it's a nice allegory, you know, in terms of how this world works within our world. Ed came to our minds immediately as a potential Steve, you know, because the wonderful thing about this piece is that it's kind of character driven, and Steve is so important to the telling of this story, and Ed is perfect, you know. And the wonderful thing is we sent him the film, we sent him the script, he looked at it, he immediately came back and said, I want to do this. And it's, you know, he came in totally prepared, questions, fascinated. You could see while he was actually watching the video as we were recording, he would look to us and say, well, wait a minute, let me know about this. He was so inquisitive and so excited to be a part of this. It really made it the whole thing a joy. Antarctic being so remote and being, I think people don't have a conception of how incredible that landscape is, nor do I think they have the idea of what the amount of wildlife that exists there. So Antarctica was just ripe for the pickings and making sure that people really are going to see something that they've never seen before. And the great thing about Disneynature is that the first week that we run the film out into the world, a portion of every ticket that's sold goes to a nonprofit organization that's supporting the conservation effort. And in this case, we're going and supporting the Wildlife Conservation Network, who is working to help penguins apropos. So it's, you know, we've done this now for every release, and I think it's one of the greatest things that Disney does.